The next speaker came from space, literally. When not founding million-dollar companies, he also enjoys being a cosmonaut member. With his extreme way of doing business, in 2014, traveling on an icebreaker to Antarctica, he selected the names to be initially involved in the Ubuntu project. Today, on the crossroads of Europe, Middle East, Africa, and Asia, please welcome founder, Canonical, and Ubuntu. Welcome, Mark Shuttleworth.
Hello, everybody. Now, you know, that was an extraordinarily insightful presentation from a platinum sponsor. And I really am quite inspired by some of the things Yasser said, because it reminded me that the essence of entrepreneurship is always thinking very, very deeply about the true nature of people, events, change, and then finding a way to express what's changing in the context of the current world. And that's as true of television as it is of digital technology, as it is of the dustbin business, right? And great entrepreneurs realize that every industry has its dogmas, its rules, it's done this way kind of guidance. And there's certain kinds of people who can only ever rise up by following those rules. But the great entrepreneurs understand that dogma only lasts a certain period of time, and you get to reinvent anything. Could be television, could be the web, could be anything, every couple of years if you think deeply about what's really going on. So, I lead a project called Ubuntu. Ubuntu for the last 8-10 years has been the favorite platform for Linux developers, and that kind of means that the vast majority of innovation that's happened in the last 10 years on the cloud or on the web has in some way had Ubuntu at the heart of it. I think that happens because we really set out to think about what we can do to clear the decks for innovators. In other words, what we can do to unleash other people's ability to create and innovate. And as a consequence of that, about 70% today of the public cloud runs on Ubuntu. You know, most of the new public clouds that are getting built themselves run on Ubuntu, but more importantly, the amazing, incredible things that people are building often have Ubuntu at the heart of them. If I look at the great brands that have sprung into our consciousness in the last 10 years, Spotify, Netflix, Instagram, many of them, most of those organizations have Ubuntu and the cloud at the heart of them. But those are all the consequences of choices we made 5 years ago, 10 years ago, to unblock certain kinds of innovation. And what keeps me up at night, what I'm interested in, is this other question. What's next? Like, what do we have to do to unleash the next wave of entrepreneurs, to unblock the next wave of innovation? So today, I'd love to show you some magic. I'd love to show you some stuff that just wasn't possible a few years ago. It's the fruit of several years' work. And the exciting thing for me is that we're only at the beginning of the possibilities that this creates. Now, I could show you this live on the web. When people see what I'm going to show you, their immediate assumption is, well, that can't be true, right? Like any magic, you know, that can't be real. There must be a trick. But it is true, and it is fundamentally changing the way the next wave of entrepreneurs will work. So, if you are faced with a problem today of in your startup doing big data analysis, you would have to go out and figure out how to get big data up and running. So I'm going to show you some stuff, and then I'm going to tell you why I think this is so important. And so you might go read Big Data for Dummies. It's a great book. You might hire some people who know something about big data. You might take some time doing all the things that smart people do on the cloud to get big data up and running. Whereas if I was going to do that, I would go to a cloud, I would go to one tool, the thing you see on the screen, I drag and drop a single file there, and I would know that on that cloud I now have up and running a best practice Hadoop infrastructure that's optimized for that cloud, and I'd connect up a couple of those lines, and within about 45 minutes, the whole thing would be up and running. If I wanted to set up a PaaS, a platform as a service, I could go and invest probably a team, 5-6 people, over 5-6 months, building out, as smart people tend to do, building out infrastructure on the cloud. Or I could point that same tool at the same cloud, drag and drop a different file, and within about 45 minutes, I'd have Cloud Foundry up and running, fully configured, with all of the updates taken care of as open source software. And lastly, if I was going to build a cloud, again, a big, complicated piece of infrastructure, you might go and study OpenStack and figure out how all the parts work and what they mean and how to configure them and connect them and so on. Or you could just take a cluster of 10 to 10,000 machines, point this same magic tool at it, drag and drop a different file onto it, and within about 45 minutes, you'd have this. You'd have a complete OpenStack up and running, configured, scaled, optimized, and flying. When people see that the first time, they think it's not real, because these things are supposed to be hard. These things are supposed to be difficult. Well, why is this important? Because all of these things are commonalities. They're things that every startup sort of has to do, every startup sort of has to share. They don't actually give you the answer to your business, right? They're just things that you have to get done. And to unblock innovation, we have to make these things painless, easy. And that's what I think we've done. So going back and looking at this historically, it's always been this question, right? Buy versus build. You know, that was a hard question in the 80s. But really what this is it's a question between standardize versus innovate. Where, as an entrepreneur, as a founder, as a leader, where do you standardize? Where do you tell your guys, don't fight those fights, don't get drawn into that battle, just do it the standard way? And where do you innovate? Where do you invest? Where do you differentiate? That's the real question. And if we look at web businesses today, simply we can tease apart everything they do into infrastructure, ops, and custom apps. And quite obviously, the custom apps are the key IP. Those are the things that you're going to build that define your business. If you're Spotify, it's the stuff that only does music that defines your business, right? There's the infrastructure, which I think everybody agrees now. You get as a commodity. You could get it from any number of clouds. If you're big enough, you might build your own cloud. But fundamentally, you treat it as a commodity. So those two things are true. What's left? What's left is this piece in the middle. And I don't just mean, the firewalls and the backups. I mean all the commonalities, all the standard stuff, all the glue, all the scale-out pieces, all of the load balancing, all of your databases, all the things that, when you really think about it, you're just taking a piece of open source software and you're using it just like any other smart person would use it. And so the question is, what magic can we work around those commonalities, those operations that will unleash the next wave of entrepreneurs? So what we've done, what you saw up on the screen there, is something called Juju. And it is the new magic. It essentially takes the code, which everybody now does share, and it wraps around that open source operational logic, right? So that all of the things that you would have to do operationally, install it, scale it out, tune it, connect it up to other pieces of software, do backups, all of that stuff becomes executable code, and probably for open source pieces, open source executable code. What does this mean? It means that instead of publishing a white paper, a company that has found an efficient way to, for example, organize 12 different parts of Hadoop into something cool, can just publish that as a single little configuration file that anybody can drop onto any cloud and instantly get all of the benefits of that white paper, of that architecture, fully expressed without them having to get their hands dirty on the inside. It gives us complete reuse of operational practices. Now, if you look at the great companies today, they're all operational masters. Google, Facebook, Amazon, they are operational masters. They operate brilliantly, right? They specialize in operations. Pretty much everybody else gets by. Well, here is a way for everybody else to operate as efficiently as Google or Facebook or Amazon, right? By crowdsourcing, by collaborating, by sharing. Reuse of those parts so that you know that you're on the best practice. Cross-platform, on any platform, on any cloud, so that vendors can take control of the way their users operate their software in order to ensure that their support costs go down and the results, customer results for their software improve. Now, this may look like a nice optional thing you could dip your toes into. Here's why I think it is going to be mandatory for the next wave of entrepreneurs. Because your standard stuff in the next wave is really complex. In the last 10 years, the standard stuff entrepreneurs, web-scale guys used was pretty simple. A smart guy on a laptop could figure out the pieces and make it work. But if you want to do that today for Hadoop, for Cloud Foundry, for OpenStack, for Storm, for the next wave of foundational tools, you're going to be completely stuck in a bog because they are huge and fast-moving. OpenStack, something like 20 pieces of software, and they change every 6 months. There's no way to track that the old way. So you really have a choice. You can go get this stuff as SaaS, in which case you're relinquishing control of operations and relinquishing control of the data. If you give your data to Amazon, the real risk is that Amazon can study your business as they've studied Netflix and cherry-pick the highest margin opportunities. So with SaaS, you're relinquishing both control of operations and control of data. With this new wave of automation, however, you're only relinquishing control of operations, and then only to the extent that you want to. You're relinquishing control because you're buying into standard open source operational practices for all of these standard components you're reusing, but you get the option to tweak those operational controls where you want to, and you keep control of the data. So everything I've said so far is relevant for people who are going to build services, who are going to build a Dropbox or a Netflix, right? You're going to build stuff that you offer to everybody else as a service. Your internal operations now can be completely automated. But there's another angle which I think is super interesting for entrepreneurs who want to build solutions enterprise solutions, big complicated pieces of software that you're going to sell to banks or other institutions. A common pattern here is 5 guys working at a bank quit the bank to make a startup to do something that the bank does badly that they want to sell back to the bank. The problem with that business today is you have to somehow get through this horrible sales engineering process. Writing your solution, easy. Getting enough institutions to trial it and figure it out, see what the value is for themselves, really hard. Again, by engineering your solution, by what we call charming up the components of your solution so that anybody can deploy it on any cloud or any physical infrastructure or any virtualization infrastructure. Gives you the ability to have a potential prospect in Korea and through a webinar essentially help them get it up and running so that they can figure out if there's value for them in your solution. And to the extent that we're working with startups now, this is transforming their sales engineering capability. So, stepping back, it's all about unleashing creativity. The next wave of entrepreneurs, they've got ideas. Things like Hadoop, things like OpenStack, things like Cloud Foundry are just necessary plumbing that they're going to need in order to express those ideas. And we've really got to get out of the way to make those things easy for them so they can focus on their actual ideas. You can play with this today. Just go to jujucharms.com. Juju is the name of the tool, and all of those components that you saw on the screen, those are called charms. So you can just go there. You'll see a whole bunch of open source stuff you can just drag and drop. And if you connect that up to a cloud, everything that you drag and drop and put on the screen there starts running, right? And will be updated and just works. That's kind of the next wave of the Ubuntu promise to you developer entrepreneurs. Well, that's all I had. Thank you very much, Plum, and I think you had some questions, or will we deal with that later? Thank you.
Thank you.
Mark, thanks for joining.
It's a great pleasure.
It's as we've discussed, I really want to hear your biggest screw up. I know it's whether it's going to be connected to the space or to the technology.
You know, I have many screw-ups, and there is, I'm embarrassed to say, a common pattern in all of them. And actually, the worst part of it is that someone early gave me advice that really should have helped me avoid those screw-ups. So I'll impart the same advice that I was given, which is a great quote from the guy who was CEO of FedEx, I think, and then Netscape. Which is that the main thing is to keep the main thing, right? Just beautiful advice, and absolutely true, and remarkably hard to do, especially if you've been successful before, right? Because now suddenly, you know, the world is your oyster, and you can do everything you like, and it's harder to spot the main thing.
So I guess this is the main thing. But it doesn't answer the question about the screw-ups.
So for example, when we set about creating Ubuntu, the fantastic thing about a platform is that people go use it for everything, right? And there were a couple of early opportunities that we'd identified as being huge opportunities. But because I was so busy chasing all of these, you know, cool things we could do on top of an operating system, you know, I let us miss some of those great opportunities. And unfortunately, it's not the only time in my life I've done that. My very first job was at a newspaper, and I was trying to get the newspaper online. It was the first time that a major global newspaper was going online. It was in the early 90s. And you know, I was working there at kind of midnight with all the late night editors and sub-editors who would put the newspaper out to the printing presses and then go have a drink. And one of the guys told me, he said, you know, the thing that keeps this whole building alive is the classified ads. And I thought, oh, that's kind of weird. That's kind of funny. That's kind of odd. And didn't think about it. But in that bit of nugget of knowledge was eBay, Craigslist, Gumtree, you know, all of the marketplaces were opportunities that we Alibaba, Amazon, all of the things we take for granted today as giant e-commerce successes. You knew everything. I knew everything I needed to know to go chase those opportunities from that one guy's drunken statement at 11:30 at night in the bottom of the newspaper. This building runs on the classified ads. And I think that's true for all of us. Trust me, you will hear in your lifetime all the advice, all of the insight, all of the tips and clues you need to know, you know, to underwrite the next wave of incredible opportunity. And the real question is, can you suss out the difference between today's dogma and that opportunity, and can you keep the main thing the main thing?
Well, staying around you, I feel like a big screw up, because with your big company, you actually didn't do anything, but a big screw up, I mean. But thank you so much for joining. Thanks for sharing your knowledge and know-how. I hope you're gonna stick around here. We have a Twitter wall with all the questions that you want to ask. Please use Twitter to ask them, especially also for the next fireside chats. So that's how I will know personally what you want to know. So please give a big round of applause to Mark. Mark, thanks a lot for joining again. See you around. Thank you very much. Thank you.